Chapter 5. The soft murmur of voices woke me from my restless sleep, and I stirred, momentarily unsure of where I was. For a second, I felt the warmth of fur beneath my arm and thought of Kodiak's familiar white coat, only to realize it was Cinder, the black and brown dog curled beside me. It was still early, the dim light of dawn barely piercing the cracks in the barn walls. As I blinked away the haze of sleep, fragments of a conversation filtered through the air. "Make sure it's cleaned by the time I return," a commanding voice instructed, one I instantly recognized. Jack's face appeared above the stall door, and both of us froze in place. My heart skipped a beat as his eyes widened, his breath catching in surprise. "You know what?" Jack suddenly called over his shoulder, his voice steady and calm. "Forget it. Don't worry about it. I'll handle it today." "Sir!" a hesitant voice replied from somewhere beyond. "You heard me," Jack continued, his lips quirking into a faint smile. "Take the morning off. Rest up. I'm sure the prince will have more than enough tasks for you to handle before the feast tonight." "If you're sure," the unseen servant stammered, clearly confused by his good fortune. "I've never been more certain. Go now, before I change my mind." Moments later, a door slammed shut, leaving only the faint echo behind. Jack turned back to me, his expression shifting to one of quiet curiosity. "Noel, what are you doing here?" I pushed myself upright, brushing bits of straw from my coat. Hiding and sleeping," I admitted, my cheeks flushing. Jack opened the stall door and crouched to greet Cinder, who leapt up eagerly to shower him with affection. "I can see that," he replied, glancing at me with raised brows. "But let me ask again. Why are you here, in the barn, instead of up at the castle?" "There wasn't any lodging available," I explained, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "And, well, considering I'm currently building a case against my stepmother, it would have been awkward to ask for a room in her home. Why didn't you tell me you needed a place to stay? Where were you sleeping before?" Jack's tone was calm, but there was an edge of concern in his voice. "I'm not a charity case," I said, meeting his gaze. "I was staying with my friend, but she's gone now." Jack said nothing, moving instead to the adjacent stalls. One by one, he unlatched the doors, letting his dogs out with practiced efficiency. His silence stretched as he worked, fastening harnesses and adjusting lines with precision. Finally, after several minutes, he spoke. "There's a spare servant's room connected to this barn," he said, his voice measured. "It's warmer than sleeping out here, and it's completely private. Go rest there. No one will disturb you." I hesitated, biting my lip. "Are you absolutely sure no one will come in?" "Positive," Jack assured me. "The only servant who uses it is already up, and even he barely sleeps there. It's just a spare room. You'll be safe." The offer was undeniably tempting. I'd barely slept, and the thought of a proper bed made my muscles ache in anticipation. "If you're sure." "I am. Go get some rest," Jack insisted. "Once Beryl is awake, I'll take you to see Kodiak." Reluctantly, I nodded. "Thank you," I said softly. "You're welcome," Jack replied with a small smile. As he finished hitching his dogs to the sled, he gestured for me to hop on. "Come on, I'll take you there." The sled ride was brisk, the cold air nipping at my cheeks as we glided over the snow. Jack stopped in front of a small, unassuming room attached to the barn and led me inside. "No one will bother you here," he said, holding the door open. The room was modest but cozy, with a neatly made bed, a small fireplace, and rows of fur-lined coats hanging in a wardrobe. A pair of large boots rested neatly by the door. "The door locks if you need it," Jack added. I glanced around, taking in the tidy space. "Thank you," I murmured again, my gratitude genuine. Once Jack left, I locked the door and sank onto the bed, exhaustion pulling me into a deep sleep almost immediately. A sharp knock woke me. Sunlight streamed through the window, its brightness amplified by the snow outside. "Jack!" I called groggily, sitting up and rubbing my eyes. "Yes, let me in," came his voice from the other side. After a pause, he added, "Please, if you're decent." Laughing softly, I unlocked the door. "Why wouldn't I be decent?" Jack stepped inside, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "I don't know. I don't have sisters. How would I know how girls dress when they sleep?" "Oh, so you've been thinking about what I'm wearing?" I teased, unable to resist. Jack's gaze flickered away, and he twisted his gloves in his hands, visibly uncomfortable. "I brought you something," he said abruptly, handing me a folded napkin. Inside was a slightly cold breakfast pastry. "And if you're ready, we can go get Kodiak." Grateful for the distraction, I nodded. "Yes, please." Within minutes, we were back at the sled, the dogs barking excitedly. The ride was exhilarating, but the cold quickly seeped through my cloak. My shivering grew uncontrollable, and Jack noticed immediately. "Noelle, you're freezing!" he exclaimed, his concern evident. "You can't control the weather," I stammered through chattering teeth. Without hesitation, Jack stripped off his gloves, handing them to me. "Here, take these." "What about you?" I asked, my fingers curling around the gloves. "I'll be fine," Jack said firmly, his focus on the trail ahead as the dogs surged forward, their eager barks echoing in the crisp morning air. Jack lifted his hand, and with a graceful motion, conjured a delicate swirl of snowflakes in his palm. The tiny flakes spun like a miniature blizzard, shimmering in the cold air. He watched them with quiet satisfaction before releasing the snow into the breeze, where it danced for a moment and disappeared. "I don't get cold," he said, his tone casual, as though the very concept was alien to him. One of the many advantages of being a mage whose magic revolves around ice. Without a second glance, Jack pulled off his woolen cap and, with an effortless motion, reached over and dropped it onto my head. His hand brushed against my hair for a fleeting moment, but he seemed completely unfazed, his focus still on the road ahead. "But you wear fur coats and woolen caps," I pointed out, tilting my head as I adjusted the oversized cap. "Why bother if you don't feel the cold?" Jack gave a faint chuckle, the corners of his lips curling into a small smile. "I already get enough stares just for being a mage," he explained. "If I walked around in nothing but a shirt during the winter, people would start whispering even more. If we want mages to be accepted in society, we have to blend in. It's about appearances." I frowned, crossing my arms over my chest. "It's not about appearances. It's about rights, Jack. Mage rights are human rights. You deserve the same respect and freedom as anyone else." For a moment, Jack turned his head, his piercing blue eyes locking onto mine. Something unspoken passed between us before he looked away again, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "You've no idea how much it means to hear that," he said softly. "To have someone who sees me for who I really am and stands by me." Before I could respond, Jack abruptly pulled on the reins, slowing the horses to a stop. The snow-covered street ahead was almost empty, save for a few faint footprints leading up to Beryl's shop. Jack climbed down from the wagon, his boots crunching in the snow as he tied the reins to a post. While he worked, my gaze drifted to the dress shop next door. In the large display window stood a breathtaking gown, its light blue fabric shimmering softly in the pale winter light. Ruffles cascaded down one side, and a white fur wrap rested elegantly on the shoulders of the mannequin. It was the kind of dress I had only dreamed of owning. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like to wear something so beautiful. But reality quickly intruded. I couldn't afford such luxuries, and I refused to let my mind wander to what Jack might think if he saw me in a dress like that. It wasn't fair to indulge in such thoughts. "Are you ready?" Jack's voice broke through my reverie. He had followed my gaze to the gown, but said nothing, instead gesturing toward Beryl's shop. "It sounds like Beryl might need some help." Raised voices carried through the crisp air as we approached. Inside, a large woman wrapped in layers of fur was towering over Beryl, her face flushed with anger. "You gave me a cream that turned my skin green," she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. To emphasize her point, she yanked up her skirts, revealing a thick leg covered in green blotches. "Look at this! I look like I'm turning into a frog!" Beryl, ever the picture of calm, held up his hands. "It's temporary," he assured her. I explained that it might happen. "The green will fade in a few days." "A few days," she bellowed. "You expect me to walk around like this for days?" Before Beryl could respond, the woman's gaze shifted to Jack. Her eyes widened in alarm, and she let out a sharp gasp. "A mage!" she shrieked, stepping back as though Jack were a wild animal. She grabbed one of her fur wraps and waved it at him, as if trying to ward him off. Jack stood perfectly still, his expression blank. Though I could see the tension in his shoulders, I couldn't stay silent. "He hasn't done anything to you," I said, stepping forward. "He's here to spy on women, no doubt," she accused, glaring at Jack. My cheeks flushed with anger. "He's here with me," I said firmly, planting my hands on my hips. Her eyes narrowed, darting between Jack and me. "Mages are all the same," she muttered. "And you're being incredibly rude," I shot back. "Should I start listing your flaws? Because I've already thought of several." Now Beryl made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh, quickly ducking behind the counter. The woman's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Are you going to let them speak to me like this?" she demanded, glaring at Beryl. Beryl straightened, smoothing his beard. "Jack hasn't done anything wrong," he said calmly. "If you're unhappy, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere." The woman let out a loud huff, gathering her furs around her. "I'll see to it that you regret this," she snapped before storming out of the shop, the bell above the door jangling violently. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Beryl let out a long sigh. "You really have a way of stirring the pot, Noelle." What was I supposed to do? Let her insult Jack, I argued. Jack gave a weary smile. I'm used to it, he said softly. You shouldn't have to be. I replied, my voice firm. Before Jack could respond, a loud howl came from the back room. My heart leapt. Cody, I called, rushing toward the sound. The door burst open, and Kodiak, my white-furred dog, came bounding toward me. His tail wagged furiously as he jumped up, licking my face, whining with excitement. I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around him. Jack knelt beside me, steadying me with one hand while stroking Kodiak's fur with the other. For a moment, everything else faded away. It was just the three of us, surrounded by warmth and joy. Beryl, watching from the doorway, chuckled softly. Looks like things are going icely between you two, he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Jack's expression was hidden from me, but the sharp withdrawal of his hand from my back said enough. Yes, Kodiak looks much better now, he said curtly. Thank you for your help. Beryl chuckled, leaning casually against the counter. I've never seen a dog pine so hard for his owner, he remarked, watching Kodiak wag his tail enthusiastically. Except maybe that one time I had to patch up Ace for Jack here. With a friendly slap to Jack's shoulder, Beryl added, How's it going with? He tilted his head slightly toward me and raised his eyebrows suggestively at Jack. Jack's response was immediate and firm. I have no idea what you're talking about. Right, Beryl replied with exaggerated disbelief, tapping the side of his nose knowingly. And I'm the Queen of Sorana. I pretended not to notice their exchange, but deep down, my heart ached. It felt increasingly unfair that Jack and I could only share a friendship, even when our connection was undeniable. If it was this obvious to someone like Beryl, how many others would start to suspect? I forced myself to smile as we wrapped up our conversation and thanked Beryl for his assistance. Once outside, Jack and I prepared the sled. Kodiak, full of energy, refused to sit still. So we decided to let him run alongside the other dogs. The brisk air nipped at my cheeks as I turned to Jack. How late is the feast supposed to go tonight? I asked, trying to sound casual. Not too late, Jack replied, adjusting the sled's lines. We'll have time afterward for that ice skating lesson, if you're still interested. Of course I am, I said eagerly. You're sure you won't get pulled into work? No. Stephen made sure I'd have a break after yesterday. He's thoughtful that way. He does seem kind, I admitted. Jack's tone remained steady, but I noticed his shoulders stiffen slightly. I think you'll get along with him. I even suggested he sit next to you tonight. Oh, I said, trying to mask my disappointment. Instead of feeling flattered, I felt a dull ache in my chest. Perhaps Jack's feelings for me weren't as strong as mine for him. Everything between us seemed strictly transactional. No wonder he had ignored my subtle flirtations and refused to dance with me. I'm not here to marry Prince Stephen. You know, I reminded him. I just need to find the will and secure funding for the school. Once we get back, I'll try asking another scribe to help. The first two turned me down. They all will, Jack said, matter-of-factly. And to stay, you'll need to excel in every event. By tomorrow morning, up to 10 girls will probably be dismissed. Stephen appreciates intelligent humor and archery. You could talk to him about those. I stayed quiet, my usual talkativeness replaced by a heavy realization. Jack seemed determined to help me win Stephen's favor. Did he truly want me to end up with the prince? The thought made my chest tighten. We reached the castle gates, which opened to let us into the dog yard. Kodiak bounded alongside Cinder, his tail wagging happily. Jack brought the sled to a halt and gestured to the adjoining room near the dog barn. The feast starts in a few hours. You can start getting ready now. I'll help feed the dogs first, I offered. I don't need 5 hours to get ready, and I'd rather not waste time. Jack nodded in agreement, stepping out of the sled to open the barn doors. As he did, a mischievous idea popped into my head. Hike! I called to the dogs, loosening the lines just enough. With a jolt, the sled lurched forward, and the dogs took off in a burst of energy. Kodiak barked joyfully, sprinting alongside us. Hey! Jack shouted, running out of the barn. But the sled was already circling the yard at full speed. I couldn't help but laugh as the wind whipped past me. After a full loop, the dogs came to a stop, panting and wagging their tails. Jack approached, shaking his head, but unable to hide the grin tugging at his lips. You can't be trusted, can you? Nope, I said cheerfully, handing him the lines. I'm trouble. That much is clear, he teased, climbing into the sled beside me. You're a hazard to everything. Then as we spent the next hour brushing down the dogs and hanging up their gear to dry. As Jack portioned out food for the animals, he glanced at me and smirked. You're covered in fur. I looked down at my dress and groaned. Despite my best efforts, dog fur clung to the fabric in stubborn patches. Can you get the rest off? I asked, turning my back to him and pulling my hair over one shoulder. Jack brushed the fur off gently, his movements so careful I could barely feel his touch. My heart raced, and I couldn't stop my mind from wandering. What if Jack didn't hold back? What if things were different between us? Hoping to break the tension, I spoke up. Back at Beryl's shop, how could you just stand there and take everything that woman said about you? She was so rude. What else can I do? Jack said quietly. If I fight back, it only reinforces the fear people have of mages. That's how we lost our rights in the first place. That's not fair, I said, my voice rising. You're the prince's advisor. You shouldn't have to endure that. It doesn't matter. All they see is my white hair. Well, they're wrong, I said firmly. We need to find your father's laws and get them signed. People need to see that mages are just like everyone else. Jack's eyes sparkled with amusement. You're not even a mage, yet you care so much. Of course I care, I replied. It's your life and the lives of my students. I don't understand how people can be so blind. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. I can't help but laugh when you get so fiery. Laugh all you want, I said, pretending to be offended. Now, where should I meet you for skating tonight? Here, it's private enough. We're not doing anything wrong by being friends, I said softly. We shouldn't have to hide. Jack's expression grew serious. I wish everyone saw it that way, he said. But you saw how people react. It's better to keep things quiet. I wanted to slap that woman, I admitted. I could tell, Jack said, a small smile returning to his face. But I'm glad you didn't. People are allowed to be wrong. Our conversation lingered in the air as we cleaned up and prepared for the evening. Despite Jack's words, the weight of our unspoken feelings hung between us, impossible to ignore.